During the 40 days of Lent, the Christian Church prepares to observe the Lord's passion and resurrection. We examine ourselves as we remember the suffering and sacrifices of Jesus on our behalf. In this season of repentance and fasting, we come to terms with our morality and need more of God's mercy. The candles of the cross represents Jesus' life and ministry. Each week we extinguish another candle, remembering how we, the human race, rejected Jesus Christ, the light of this world.
Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, 'Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God.'" Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, 'He will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone.'" Jesus answered him, "It is also written, 'Do not put the Lord your God to the test.'" Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, 'Worship the Lord your God and serve him only.'" Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him.
We extinguish the first candle. You got stuck on me.
This one?
Mm-hmm. As we remember Jesus' lonely trial in the desert, this account reveals how similar and different we are from Jesus. We face temptations as well, but we know we are not always faithful like Jesus. Where Jesus refuses the devil, we surrender. We do not always trust God's provision. We put the Lord our God to the test. We worship and serve other gods. The devil tempts Jesus to abandon his mission to save the world. Consider how you also face temptations to abandon the mission God has given you. How have you been tempted to trust in your own ability to meet your needs rather than God's provision? How have you been tempted to seek greatness and renown yours for yourself rather than God's glory? How have you been tempted to worship false gods and empty idols rather than to worship and serve God only?
Pray with me. Pray with me.
Holy God, you know how we face temptations every day to ignore you and abandon the mission you have given us. During this season of Lent, we ask that you would purify our hearts and minds. Help us to grow in love for you. Make our commitment to your mission even deeper. Protect us when we are tempted. Root us in your scripture so we might find the devil in your truth. Give us the grace to repent so we might seek first your good, true, and peaceful kingdom. Amen.
Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness until he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There an angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So he thought to himself, "I'm going to go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up." When the Lord saw that Moses had gone over to look, God spoke to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." Moses said, "Here I am." God said, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." At this Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. God said to Moses, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt, and I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to lead them out of Egypt into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people Israel out of Egypt. Moses said, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? God said, I will be with you. And this will be a sign that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the Israelites out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said, suppose I go to the elders of Israel and say, the God of your fathers appeared to me, and they ask me, well, what is his name? What shall I tell them? God said, I am who I am. Say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God also said, assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to me. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. Now go, assemble the elders of Israel and say, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you, and I have seen what has been done to you in Egypt, and I have promised to bring you out of your misery in Egypt and take you to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. This is the story of our people. New Testament lesson is not just a continuation of what we heard last week out of the book of Matthew. If it sounds familiar, it means you were paying attention last week, because we're going to start. We're going to kind of overlap from the book of Matthew. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? Some say John the Baptist. Others say Elijah. Still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Jesus said, what about you? Who do you say that I am? Simon Peter said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. For this has not been revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he told his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. He said, never, Lord, this will never happen to you. Jesus turned to Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you are a stumbling block to me. For you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their own cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to gain their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. For what good would it do to profit the whole world, gain the whole world, and lose your soul? Or what can you give in exchange for your soul? For I tell you, the Son of Man is coming in his Father's glory with all his angels, and will reward each person according to what they have been done. Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. To the glory of God, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Get off on the right foot. After all, you only get one chance to make a first impression, whether it's a first date, a first customer contact, a job interview. It can be hard to overcome a poor start. I'm reminded of the Far Side cartoon, that with a picture of a flying saucer that had landed in a farmer's field. And as the farmer watched in amazement, two of the aliens descended the steps, and the one in front tripped and fell down the steps of the UFO. To which the one in the back said, well, so much for instilling them with a sense of awe. In the text we heard last week, and again just a few moments ago, Jesus has put his disciples on the spot. Not wholly satisfied with hearing their reports of the word on the street, Jesus asked them point blank about who they think he is. And Simon Peter hits the mark pretty close by declaring, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. The word Messiah, which can also be translated as Christ, is a title meaning the anointed one. It could be anybody. It could be given to any leader seemingly chosen by God for some divine purpose. And when Simon Peter calls Jesus the Son of God, we agree with that. Whether Simon realized the nature of the Trinity means that he also is God, we don't know. We know that Jesus was pleased with the answer that he got, for he congratulates Simon on his insight, telling them that only by a revelation from God would Simon have been able to figure this out. Simon, a simple fisherman, has seen what the religious leaders were not able to, and Jesus commends him and chooses for him a new special task, to be the foundation of the Church of Jesus Christ. Of course, he'll need a new name that fits his new position, so Jesus declares that now Simon is to be known as Peter, the rock, who could be counted on to be unbreakable, solid, full of courage. And Jesus hands Peter the keys to the kingdom, with all the glory and power that go along with it. It's a huge promotion for Peter. He goes from one of the 12 to number one of the 12. He's no longer just one of the guys. He's now the one that the rest of the disciples will see as a role model, the leader, the right hand of the Messiah. Have you ever experienced anything like that to any degree? Maybe an unexpected promotion at work, winning an election to a public office, hitting the lottery, making the game-winning basket, being chosen for the lead in the school play or a special musical solo. You might feel that it just doesn't get any better than this. And maybe we start to think we're on top of the world. Of course, when you're on top, there's really only one way to go from there. As he's soon to realize, the problem with Peter's answer wasn't that he didn't recognize Jesus as a Messiah. He got that right. What Peter didn't know was what a Messiah was, or at least the one who was standing in front of him. Scholars see a transition in Matthew's account between the two parts of the story. Once Peter has made his confession, Jesus' focus changes. What had been a public ministry of teaching and healing now becomes instructions for his disciples. The phrase, "from that time on," serves to tell us, the listener, that there is a new target on the horizon. In Luke's account, chapter 9, he tells us that Jesus set his face to Jerusalem, that is, toward the cross. It's the turning point. He knows what lies ahead, and it's important that this ragtag bag of followers understands what faces them there. As Jesus begins to map out the road ahead, it's obvious to Peter, and no doubt the other disciples, this isn't the blueprint for a conquering Messiah. They are all representatives of centuries of Jewish hope for a Messiah to come with glory and power and might and lead a rebellion, to cast off the shackles of whomever it was that was oppressing the Israelites at that time, whether it was the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, or in Jesus' time, the Romans. They expected a new King David, a mighty warrior. You really can't blame them. They had no earthly comparison from which to draw. But they had set their sights too low. For all his power and prestige, it's hard to imagine King David at the height of his power would have been known 200 miles from Jerusalem. In the novel, God Knows, a fictitious yet somewhat historical account of David's life, David himself is reflecting on his power. And he brags that I took a kingdom the size of Vermont and turned it into one the size of Maine. Like Moses, thousands of years before, Peter was face to face with God, and it wasn't the type of God he had anticipated. Moses had to ask God in the burning bush what his name was in case he got questioned. Peter knew the identity of Jesus, but not what that identity entailed. And when his first lesson is given, Peter fails miserably. As Jesus begins to show the disciples what lies ahead, the suffering, denial, rejection, death, it's obvious that the 12 are caught off guard. And Peter, as the newly anointed leader of the group, feels it's his responsibility to clear up what is surely a misunderstanding that Jesus has as his destiny. He takes Jesus aside and starts to lecture him. "Never, Lord," Peter exclaims. "This will never happen to you." But instead of setting the Lord straight, Peter realizes quickly enough that he stepped in it. 20 years ago, the Pittsburgh Pirates had a top prospect in the minor leagues named Ron Wright. He had been somewhat injury prone, but kept moving up through the minor leagues, excelling at each level. He made it to the big leagues with the Pirates for a brief time, but never played in a game. Injuries kept derailing his progress, and he bounced around from organization to organization. Finally, Ron Wright made it to the major leagues with the Seattle Mariners. His first at bat in the major leagues, he struck out looking on 3 pitches. Never swung the bat. Next time up, he hit into a triple play. His third at bat, he hit into a double play. 3 times to the plate, 6 outs. Not a resounding start to his major league career. And the sad part is he never had a chance to redeem himself. That was the only game he ever played in the major leagues. It was a rocky start, but compared to Peter, it was as if he'd hit a grand slam home run. As it's recorded in Matthew, in just 5 verses, Peter has gone from the foundation of the church, the rock on which Jesus will build his church, to being called a stumbling block and even worse, Satan. Jesus then turns to the other disciples, who have to be aghast at this turn of events, and tells them what it will take to be his disciple. Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. You'd think that this exchange between Jesus and Peter would serve to inform the rest of them that this is going to be a rocky journey. It's not going to be all fame and fortune. They're not in this for earthly glory and honor. You'd think. But in each Matthew, Mark, and Luke, at some point after this exchange, the disciples get into arguments about which of them is the greatest. They are still seeking glory. None of the disciples could have ever guessed that the way that Jesus was going to live his messianic calling was to go to Jerusalem. Instead of leading a rebellion, be arrested, suffer, and die like a criminal on a cross, and then be raised from the dead on Easter morning. Just as Peter's confession was from divine revelation, the disciples wouldn't come to that conclusion from human calculation. And if we're listening, we get it from the mouth of Jesus himself. This isn't human stuff. This is God's stuff. This is Jesus telling us what God is doing in the world and telling us to get behind him and follow. The road and the ride ahead for Jesus and his friends is going to be rocky and rough. There will be times of adulation and times of despair. I'm sure you can picture riding in a car with a driver who's not just taking it easy. They've thrown caution to the wind. They have a destination in mind, and they're going to get there regardless of how much it frightens the passengers. We've all been there. Seatbelt fastened, holding onto the door handle tightly, using that emergency passenger side brake. It's Jesus at the wheel. He hasn't promised us a smooth ride. The journey is going to take his disciples to places that they would have never gone on their own. They may have to give up things they want and do things that are dangerous. Following Jesus isn't for the faint of heart, and it's more than giving lip service. We can come to church every Sunday, but that doesn't make us Christians any more than standing in your garage makes you a car. To follow Jesus, we have to go out through those doors and into the world. That's the rocky part. He'll lead us to the hungry who need fed, the thirsty who need some cool water, and the prisoner or the sick person who needs to know that they haven't been forgotten. He may take us to places where women are being abused or workers are being exploited. He may take us to places where no one cares about Jesus or the people who minister in his name. He may take us to people who need actual food and clothing, and to those who need spiritual food and clothing. If we think that maybe somebody else is better to do that than we are, or has better time, better gifts, or more time, remember what he told his disciples was required. Deny yourselves, take up your cross, follow me. When we do, we won't be alone. Even face to face with God, Moses balked at going to Pharaoh to demand the release of the slaves. I'm sure Moses had his doubts. Moses had left his life of luxury as the grandson of the Pharaoh. He left that behind when he fled Egypt as a fugitive. He had zero interest in going back. He was comfortable hiding in Midian. God told Moses, get going. I will be with you. I'm always amused when driving through thick fog, how quickly cars come up behind me, and they can't wait to pass since I'm being cautious. But once they do pass, it's amazing how fast they slow down once there's no taillights to follow. Jesus doesn't send us out unarmed, even if it's rocky or foggy. We're not even out in front. When we're traveling a rough road, isn't it good to have somebody to follow? Thanks be to God.
Thank you for letting us share our worship service with you today. We invite you to join us in person next Sunday at 10:30, or if you prefer, to listen online Sunday afternoon. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at www.marionpress.org and click the Donate Now button. May God bless you and have a great week.